Well, this is quite the upset. Everyone's panicking. The S&P 500 is down 4% so far this morning, and Bitcoin's down 5%. So I think all in all, things aren't nearly as bad as some people are making them out to be, but it's not great. These tariffs that Donald Trump announced yesterday are pretty steep. They're pretty heavy, and this video is going to probably offend some people, but I don't think the tariffs are a good idea. I think free trade is better. I think free trade is better for the world. And so in this video, I'm going to briefly share, briefly because I'm in the airport and I have a plane to catch, but I'm going to briefly share my thoughts on what's going to happen and, why I think Trump is doing this and, potentially the real reasons why he's doing this. So the fundamental problem we have is that technology is making things better, cheaper, and faster, right? Things are getting more affordable, right? A lot of Americans don't like the idea of American jobs going overseas to other places, but the reality is that we do like it when those products and services that people overseas are making is cheaper than American, right? Why? Because American labor is expensive. Why? Because Americans are wealthy, right? And so, of course, people are going to outsource to the rest of the world, right? It's, when you are making more money, you outsource more things for other people to do for you, right? And so America outsourcing all these jobs over the last 50 years, yes, there is a very real fiat element to it. Yes, there's corruption to it. Yes, there's all kinds of cheating involved, right? But the bigger driver, in my opinion, is just the fact that prices fall to the marginal cost of production, which is forever towards zero. We've seen this with many empires in the past, right? The Dutch are coming to mind right now for some reason, mostly than anyone else, back 300, 400 years ago, right? Why? Because it's what happens. You have the leading empire, you have the leading nation, make lots of innovations, lots of discoveries, lots of scientific achievements, which makes their government and their political power greater, which makes their reserve currency more powerful, right? But eventually, at a certain point, what happens is that nation becomes so profitable as a function of their own success that they have to outsource, right? Because nobody wants to do the dirty work anymore, right? Nobody wants to do the labor anymore. People are wealthy enough that they have the financial privilege to retire, right? That's something people need to remember, is that, sure, Americans can complain that their retirement isn't buying them as much, but the reality is that most of the world can't retire, right? 80% of the world's adults are never going to retire, right? Being able to have the discussion for retirement is in of itself a privilege of the wealthy, including you, right? And so, I think it's a mixture of both of these things, right? I think that the tariffs are entering the picture, trying to combat the corruption and cheating and whatever, and I think that's good. I think it's probably a good thing, and I think that will probably help. However, you can't solve the fundamental problem. The fundamental problem is that prices are falling down and down and down. The free market is trying to be deflationary, and what they're going to run into here is it's not going to be sustainable over the long term. And so I think the question is, do they think it is actually going to be stable, or do they know that it's not going to be stable and this is actually a giant ploy, a giant scheme, a giant piece of a bigger picture, right? What I think is really interesting is that we're seeing yields on treasuries drop, right? Why? Because investors are fleeing to bonds, right? For the last 5 years, since 2020, investors have not really wanted American debt, right? China doesn't want it, Japan doesn't want it, Russia can't have it. Long-term investors don't want it because the juice just ain't worth the squeeze anymore, right? And so what I think could be happening, which you've probably heard this before if you're watching this video already, but what I think could be happening is they are trying to scare the markets and scare them into what? Bonds, so that they can have the yields fall, so that they can refinance, a couple $1 trillion worth of debt over the course of the rest of this year, which is what they have to do. So if that's what they're trying to do, if-then statements, right? If that is what they're trying to do, then I think this is going to be short-term, because I don't see how it could be long-term. If that's what they're trying to do and they're trying to lower rates so they can refinance, then as soon as Trump gets what he wants, which is lower interest rates, then I think that's time to, walk back the tariffs and give the market some relief, right? Let the Fed start cutting again, let, Treasury yields come down, right? Bessent wants power back in the Treasury, not in the Fed. So, I think there's, a lot of things to consider there, although that may not be what they're thinking of, right? Obviously, I'm not claiming to know what they're thinking, I have no idea. But what I do think is interesting is that a lot of people are very politicized with this, right? There's a lot of people out there that think, oh, these tariffs are the end of the world and this is economic Armageddon. And other people are saying, oh, this is a great idea. This is what we should be doing all along. This is great. Frankly, I think both of those people are wrong. This is not Armageddon, and this is not liberation as it's been branded by the master brander, which is Trump, right? So I think, I don't think it's the end of the world. I don't think it's the beginning of a new dawn. I think, like anything, there's pros and there's cons. Probably these tariffs are going to create a lot of new jobs, and also it's probably going to destroy a lot of jobs. My guess is that the net consequences and the net downsides are probably going to be greater in total than the net benefits. But I don't know that, and I think that's the funny thing is that like anything anymore in fiat world, you have to pick your political side, right? Do you want the blue lever or the red lever to have the money printer go in your favor, right? And right now the red side of the equation is pulling the lever hard and what they want their political aspirations to be, right? So people are going to remain polarized about this. People are never going to come to an agreement. Why? Because this is economics, and economics is incredibly complicated, incredibly nuanced, and is so intertwined that if you change something today, you're not going to know the real impact of what it's going to do 10 years from now until 20 years in the future, right? Like if you change something in the present, you're not going to know what it's going to do now. You're not going to know what it's going to do in the future. Only in the far future will you be able to look back, and hopefully with some degree of a lack of bias, then you'll be able to put the pieces together of figuring out what actually happened, right? This is why economics is kind of a pseudoscience, and this is why you should not have monetary policy in the hands of individuals. Because individuals are not omnipotent enough, individuals are not all-knowing enough, individuals are not wise enough to be able to control the world's money, right? The price of money, the cost of capital. People don't have enough information to be able to do that properly. And that's assuming that they're ethical actors. And I would argue that it's not even really ethical to print your own money to save the dollar or whatever, or save your local currency, right? So anyway, that's kind of my thought, is I think there's upsides potentially to these tariffs. I think there's downsides. I think there's probably more downsides. But I think what's really interesting is that we're still seeing treasury yields fall, right? And a good quote is that if you're trying to figure out what is somebody's motivation, try to figure out what the result was. And so far, treasury yields are falling, and it's pretty clear Trump wants that already. So maybe this is all a giant ploy to get interest rates lower to then create some sort of next boom cycle, hopefully later this year or next year or something, right? So there's possibilities, but I think that's the important thing for myself. The important thing I'm reminding myself of today is that that's the real problem, is that prices are trying to follow the marginal cost of production. Americans are going to outsource to the rest of the world, and the rest of the world is going to outsource to AI. That's what's going to happen. People's jobs are going to go away. And Donald Trump can't fix that. Joe Biden can't fix that. Obama can't fix that, right? You have more and more competitive physical machines. You have more and more competitive, digital intelligent machines, right? And we're demonetizing human labor, right? In the same way that every new invention for thousands of years gave horses new, safer jobs until the horse became demonetized. It's the same thing for human labor. And this is the fundamental problem that I think is going to cause so much political turmoil in the coming years and decades, right? This is something that Bill Gates and Elon Musk and other, wealthy people of the world that are technologists understand, right? Bill Gates was on, I think, Jimmy Fallon last night or 2 nights ago talking about how AI is going to demonetize human labor, basically. Elon Musk has talked about the same thing, and those two guys have a lot of other political disagreements, right? And so it doesn't matter if you're on one side or the other side of the political spectrum. No matter what, this is arguably one of the most significant, probably the most significant economic problem of the next 10 to 20 years, is that we're going to go from a world of billions of people that do have labor worth being monetized to now labor that's no longer monetized. And probably a part of that demonetization is going to be from perverted fiat incentives, right? We've all seen the charts. We all know what happened in 1971. And so, yeah, a lot of the theft of the value of human labor is going to be because of fiat perverted incentives. But the far bigger reason is just that human labor is trending to zero, right? The benefit is that everything gets cheaper for us to buy, but the downside is that it's harder to earn an income. And this is why it's so critical and important that people are focusing on Bitcoin, not on political shenanigans and debates. It's because if you can buy Bitcoin, you can buy the future. And in the future, governments are going to try this whole universal basic income thing. They're going to try this human fund or this dividend fund, right? Because in a post-work or post-scarcity economy, what do? You just give out helicopter checks to everybody, right? Surely that'll work. But it won't work, because if you give out these helicopter checks and there's no work backing the money, then the money trends to zero, right? This is why Bitcoin is so critical. It solves this problem of people being able to preserve their purchasing power into the future, when into the future their labor and their other assets, frankly, only become more and more diluted, more and more free and open to everyone, right? And so a lot of people are terrified of that future right now, of jobs leaving and jobs going overseas and jobs going digital, a lot of people are terrified of that right now, right? It is quite literally the #1 headline on the planet today. That is the whole reason why Trump is doing these tariffs. It's a reactionary measure to people being afraid of the future taking away their income streams, right? Real estate investors are terrified of the real estate cash flows being taken away, right? The NASDAQ and S&P 500 are, going down a lot today, right? Almost as much as Bitcoin. Why? Because they're reliant on future cash flows, and those future cash flows have just been sliced, assuming these tariffs hold, right? And so my point is that this is the #1 economic problem in the world, is this reality of humans are rapidly being demonetized over the next 10 to 30, 40 years, and they don't know how to act with that, and they don't have the tool to act with that. Why? Because we have a monetary problem, right? We don't have sound money that is tech agnostic, digital in nature, backed by energy, that is apolitical, right? And Bitcoin is the solution to the world's largest economic problem, which is the demonetization of labor, because it is the solution to the world's largest monetary problem, which is that of political currency, right? So, I don't know what you think about, all that's happening today. I would love to hear what you're thinking in the comments below. But all I have to say is that I think there are going to be silver linings to this. I think there's going to be downsides to this. I think it's totally possible Trump actually believes his own Kool-Aid and he thinks that these tariffs are going to be sustainable over a long period of time. I'm telling you, they're not. Or, maybe he's doing it because, he's trying to do what I think he's actually trying to do, which is lower Treasury rates so they can refinance all the debt, because, again, we have a debt problem, we have an asset problem. So either way, the long-term view hasn't changed. I think, frankly, Bitcoin's doing very well, given the fact that it is barely down more than the index fund of the world, right, the S&P 500. I think that's, it could be a lot worse, and I think it's holding up pretty well. It's not doing as well as gold, right, which kind of makes sense. Gold is, in people's minds, the bigger risk-off measure, but I think we're starting to see that transition where Bitcoin is no longer trading like a high-risk tech stock, right? Many tech stocks are down way more than Bitcoin today, So I think we're starting to see that transition. I still think that transition is going to take many years to be fully realized, but someday, everybody's going to realize the solution is not voting red or voting blue. People are going to realize the solution is not tariffs or reciprocal tariffs. People are going to realize the fundamental problem. The fundamental problem is we have the free market trying to create deflation, and we have political currency and governments and human incentives wanting to have inflation. And these two competing forces are going to collide and head on. And what is the solution? An escape hatch to allow deflation in the real economy while we still allow inflation in the fiat economy. And Bitcoin achieves that. Bitcoin is a escape hatch. Bitcoin is a Trojan horse, giving fiat permission to debase and dilute itself into oblivion, while also giving permission to the general economy to just keep building productivity for the human race and save their energy in terms of Bitcoin. So anyway, I hope you appreciated this short little video. I gotta go catch a flight, and I guess the question to end the day on is, what's the tariff for Bitcoin? If I'm going to send Bitcoin to another country, what's the tariff on that? Try to tariff that. Thanks.